Hello, everyone, and welcome to our fourth and final Cold Chain Leader interview in 2020. I'm Shane Brennan, Chief Executive of the UK Cold Chain Federation. Today, I'm joined by Stephen Lawrence, founder and CEO of both the iSet Group and Magnavale. I'm really excited to bring you today's conversation. I'm sure it will really round off a series of insights into the future of cold chain. Stephen, welcome to Cold Chain Live.
Thank you, Shane.
I really appreciate your time. I know how busy you are with numerous interests, not only within the UK cold chain, but what I really want us to explore together is the role of the property and investment industry in shaping the future of the cold chain. And I don't think there's anyone better for that than yourself. As you know, our theme is towards net zero. And one thing I know for sure is if that goal is achievable at all, it will only be achievable if property businesses like yours see reason to invest in the infrastructure, building and technologies that will make it possible. But before we get into all of that, it's probably best starting at the beginning. Can you talk about how you got into the UK cold chain?
I got into UK cold chain back in 2011. I bought a company that ND at the time was selling, which was the Old Christian Salverson business. And they sold us a number of sale and leasebacks in the cold store area. I did a lot of research at the time, and as a consequence, thought there was an opportunity in the cold store market for both investment and operational side, which I've been invested in since, I say, 2011. It probably hasn't changed as quickly as I anticipated it would do, but it is changing at a real rapid rate today. Due to as in the areas which you've talked about, really, which is net zero positioning, and basically number of buildings becoming obsolete in terms of what the market requires in terms of size, efficiency, etc.
Yeah, I mean, one thing is obviously you came in, so you bought the properties, and actually you've developed the Magnavale Group, which is now a pretty significant player in the UK market and as an operating and trading business. Was that really part of the plan?
Yeah, when we bought a number of properties which were actually vacant at the time, which were the company that went bust, Innovate, and there was a number of different property owners that had owned Risk Real Estate, and initially we bought them with a view of just trying to keep them operational and reducing things like rates and cost of keeping them vacant. But the objective was that we thought that there was an undervalue in the cold store industry, and we also thought that a number of the different buildings which were being operated would become redundant through things, being too small, wrong gases, being just the age of the buildings. I mean, some of the buildings date back to the 70s when they had the butter and cheese mountains and they used to freeze them. So there's still a number of buildings which are just being held together by ice. But so that we thought that it would become turned around quicker, but it's now 2020 and we've got to that kind of watershed position.
But there's a lot of investment money, isn't there? I mean, just in the general sense, with the Americans, with the Lineage and Americold global race for space, it seems to be a bit of a sort of a nice bubble of interest right now. What do you think are the main drivers of that?
Well, the main drivers in most real estate investment is kind of yield and where they see the market. The cold store market is both has got a higher yield than just general warehouses and a number of other different sectors. So I think that the drive is fundamentally yield, but private equity and property businesses like thematics. I mean, thematics is the big word.
Why is the thematic important? How does that? Why does that sort of come as important to an investment decision making in these sorts of companies?
People like to control a whole market or see where there's a whole market. I mean, you've seen the number of private equity, whether it's in retail warehousing, whether it's in retail, whether it's in offices, whether it's in warehouses, last mile logistics. Everything's a thematic in terms of what investors want to see, because they want to see the growth, they want to see a sizable investment in that, and they want to be able to see that they can actually change a marketplace. So yeah, that's the big change.
Yeah, and I guess you were kind of already doing that before we saw the sort of the American kind of entry into the UK. And I guess is that sort of similar motivation for you in how you see it?
Yeah, I think it was, and I mean, as you've probably seen the similar position in the first wave of private equity investing in both Agro Merchants and Newcold. I mean, they're probably at the same kind of time. They've invested in the same kind of concept. They're the first to market. They've seen the opportunity, and they've invested heavily in both those two operations. You know, there are mistakes. There are in any kind of first to market, you're always going to make mistakes, and you probably believe things are going to happen quicker than they actually do. But you know, when these things take off, they take off in a very large way, which you've seen with Americold and Lineage and Nichirai. You know, you've seen them really pushing the envelope in this kind of investor institutional interest.
Obviously, I mean, you and I have spoken before, and you've got some very clear views around where the strengths and weaknesses are of the current UK cold chain. How would you sort of characterise it?
The strengths are, and the strengths and weaknesses are probably the same, really, in the sense that, you know, the UK is it's an island, so it's an internal demand. There's no threat from other countries. We've got the added position of Brexit. We've got the added position that there's a limited supply of pallet spaces, and I think we've got to a point now in the end of the year, so from August to December, we've got 100% occupancy in virtually every cold store in the UK. And obviously, the way food comes into the country, it's not 100% occupied from January to June, not in every single cold store, but generally it's I would say we're 100% occupied. There's now big opportunities in terms of there's an obsolescent stock, and talked about, you know, 1970s buildings still trading where there's virtually no warehouses that haven't been reclad, re-altered, redone since the 1970s. But in cold store industry there is, which is quite a bizarre position, and shows the lack of investment over a number of years. There's obviously changes in clients' requirements. This net zero cold chain position gives changes, and also I think the changes in the location requirements of cold stores, because over the last 40-50 years, what was deemed to be the right location 40-50 years ago may not be right today, because difference in delivering for the last mile solutions, differences in terms of how it goes to numbers of retailers, differences in just the whole industry of transportation. And a lot of these buildings, as I say, are just, a lot of the old stores are just too small. They're just not really economical to run, and they'll become obsolete definitely in the next 5 years.
And if you look across the piece, I mean, there's a lot of projects at least being discussed in terms of development. Whether we see all of them coming to fruition, obviously, is always a different point. But fundamentally, we're talking about a lot of space potentially coming down in the UK market. And do you think that you're confident there is that space for there is the space in the market for all of that space? Or actually, there'll be how do you think that will play out?
Well, my view is there's 500,000 pallet. If there's circa 2.5 million spaces of pallet spaces in the UK market, there's about 500,000 pallet spaces to come out over the next 5 years. And at the moment, there's 500,000 spaces that have either got consent or near getting consent to build. In addition to the 500,000 spaces already due to come out, there's probably at least another 500,000 of spaces that are not right for the long term in this industry. So I think there is going to be further development. What's been the barrier to entry really is that the value, the end value of the buildings, i.e. what it can be rented out as per pallet per week for the storage, doesn't match what it costs to build. So we've either seen buildings that have been built which actually after being built are worth less than what they would have been if they weren't built. So we've seen that in a number of smaller cold stores, you know, family-owned operations which have done. And on some of the larger operations, I think I'm not sure whether the investment into some of the buildings have been really thought through for 25 to 40 years of running. I don't think they've been fully specified to the right level.
That's the thing that worries me, actually. Coming at from the point of view of the leader of the Cold Chain Federation is, are we building the right stuff? You know, have we historically? I think historically the answer to that has been no. I think I'm more optimistic about what's coming now. But even then, in terms of the technologies that we're going to adopt, in terms of the building standards we're going to follow, I don't mean by any means they're going to be substandard from a building regulations point of view, but from the point of view of being fit for purpose for this kind of net zero ambition, or this kind of what's going to be required of us in the next 20, 30 years as a supply chain. Do you think there's a kind of, where do you think we are in terms of that? Do you think we've got the right kind of mindset around what we're going to build and the quality and purpose?
Well, I can't talk for everybody else, but I do see that I think the whole warehousing or the whole logistics industry is as a change. Generally built in the logistics industry, kind of 10, 12 meter warehouses that have been spec built for occupiers. And probably the same is true for cold storage, because people have built stores which are not really thought through for the operation and not really thought through to maximize or minimize energy, maximize efficiency, stop things which don't necessarily, reduce maintenance. They've just thought as what creates the right value, because they've been trying to get it valued and try to get it in relation to raising cash. I think the change in the marketplace in regards to financing, and the change in the marketplace with regard to rates and long-term requirements for companies to be have their whole supply chain tied in with this whole part is going to be is the change. And I think we will see more purpose-built, long valued buildings built. You've seen that in the non-cold store industry over the last 5 years, where the drive towards online has made far more efficiency in terms of the way these buildings have been built, for the amount of turn in buildings, to how things are stored, how things are automated. All of this is really critical. So you've seen that, and I believe the same is going to be true on the cold store industry. I think you'll see far more automation. I think you'll see far these buildings being used far more aggressively, i.e. they're going to be in and out. There's going to be a lot of added value to these buildings. I mean, the building that we're looking at to put into Thames Enterprise Park, which is next to DP World, which you're aware of, Shane, is 150,000 pallets. But in addition to the 150,000 pallets, there's 500,000 square feet of cross-dock, added value, other processing which will sit alongside it, which is enormous.
I think that's probably where the game changer element, I think, comes from what you're talking about in terms of that development idea. The high concept behind that is really quite exciting, isn't it? Because it's about sort of rethinking how we actually do the supply chain. So taking touch points out of the market. I mean, I don't want to paraphrase and put words in your mouth, but that's really where you see the opportunity.
The location of this particular site is unique in Europe, because there's not another site I'm aware of, definitely not another cold store that has a port, a rail track, the M25, and of course the biggest market in the UK, or if not the biggest market in Europe. So it is a unique location, and the ability to build to 48 meters high is, again, in terms of anywhere, getting a consent for a building of that size on the outskirts of the M25 is a unique. There's very few places you could actually build such a building.
So it would require a bit of a change of mindset, though, wouldn't it? In terms of this is one of the problems a bit with any industry, and logistics probably as much as any, is this think about the way you've done things in the past, and rather than, and in terms of compared to how you do them now. So that kind of point-to-point primary distribution, secondary distribution, moving between them on a small island kind of model that we have in our mindset. What you're proposing actually is about bringing that all under one roof. Do you sort of see that? Do you see the demand for that and the awareness of the opportunity of that coming through in the sort of potential customer base?
Well, the discussions we've had with some of the main parties is they understand it very easily. I mean, it's not thing. There is resistance from some of the big parties, and I think mostly it's because of the way the procurement is done. Because you have somebody that deals with transport, and then you have somebody who deals with logistics, and you have somebody that deals with processing, and you have somebody that deals with packaging, and they've all got the title director in front of their name. And actually bringing that together and say, by the way, actually we can bring it under one roof, and by the way, that takes away 4 touches, which in itself, you know, is probably 25, 30 pounds a pallet during that period, ignoring other costs. It's just enormous. And but you know, that's the variance, but it's the modern clever people grasp it very, very quickly.
Yeah, it's the early adopters and those that are sort of, you know, and you see it in the market now, you know, when it's close to customer, whether it's, I don't know, everyone talks about Ocado, but, you know, the way they're revolutionising the way you see that part of supply chain, the early adopters are the ones that I think there is enough willingness to sort of look for this sort of stuff now. We are in a sort of phase change in how people see logistics, and we are looking at sort of game-changing innovation. So I think that's that really, really fits well.
And I think the net zero thing is the really, you know, what you're referring to, and that it's a bit like the smoking ban. You know, we actually, for all of us that were slightly older than yourself, Shane, is, you know, you grew up, and I don't smoke, but you know, to think that there wasn't going to be smoking on trains or planes was unrealistic, and then not to have smoking in pubs would seem impossible. But literally turned on one day and said there's no smoking on pubs, and everybody adopted it, and they adopted it worldwide, which is pretty amazing, really. And I think we're at the same position, and you've got the same change in terms of the views on things like drinking and driving. You know, where you know, back in the 70s, it wasn't viewed like that same way, whereas today, you know, it's socially unacceptable, and soon it's going to be socially unacceptable to have wasted food miles. And congestion and pollution and all the other things that go with these things.
One of the things that I sort of very clear to me is a risk. We talk a lot about sort of whether industry and government understand each other on this sort of stuff in terms of regulation and burdens. We obviously tend to go there first, but actually is the industry understanding each other in terms of how it's looking at the issue? So I think you've talked there, you know, in terms of these sort of these investments coming in, the business case for making investments in very new and sophisticated infrastructure, new buildings and the like, that requires the customer to go with you and understand the long-term objective. And I guess when it comes to our kind of the retail customers and the manufacturing customers of the cold chain, getting them to really value the net zero opportunity or the environmental opportunities of being more efficient within their sort of more hidden elements of their supply chain is a big challenge to get over. Do you feel like there is a proper awareness in their customers about the potential to take 4 touches out of their supply chain as part of their achieving their environmental goals, or have they got there yet in their mindset, do you think?
As I say, I think some do and some don't. I think at the end of the day, most of this is going to be driven by money. You know, if taking four touches out makes a considerable saving, that's what's going to drive it, because economics usually win over. So, and if reducing the amount of carbon out of your supply chain reduces cost, again, that will affect people's decisions. At the moment, that's not the case, but you know, they're talking about like the amount of sugar and salt being added to and calories in terms of food. If they put this was the amount of electricity used, or this was the amount of wasted miles, it's the kind of name and shame position, and it's also how's it put forwards. I mean, there's a big drive now in terms of non-use of plastics, as I say, congestion. The whole thing is really key.
And then if you get over that sort of mental shift of the idea of putting more stuff close together rather than moving a lot around the country, which is kind of the historical model, then you create the opportunity for that kind of thing and that kind of mindset of how to run the supply chain, the food supply chain in particular?
Well, the supply chain or the supply chain industry works around clustering. I mean, you know, if you're in the logistics supply chain, everybody is talking about clustering, whether it's labor supply, whether it's buildings, whether it's engineering. All of these things work better in a cluster. And I think food as a cluster is something that works really, really well. I mean, you see market clusters historically in terms of the cold chain environment. We've got a similar position. I mean, as you know, in East London, they were moving out of central London into East London, all of the markets, and we're looking at the supply to those markets and supply to those customers, where you don't need to go into a market, because a lot of the end users don't buy from the market. They actually buy through a market person, but they don't buy their side to be through the market. They don't go down the van. It's delivered to the restaurant from the party. So I think we're looking at the storage element of that market.
I think it's a really powerful point, actually, that idea of clustering, because we're publishing a map of the UK cold chain this week as part of Cold Chain Live, and you can see the historic cluster, the seafood cluster, and the sort of agricultural cluster, and the sort of near farm, which go back to your point from the beginning, which is cold stores built out of the intervention era and basically being close to the point of production. Really, this innovation is about bringing the point of consolidation close to the consumer, isn't it?
I think cold stores and most of logistics is the same property as the same as every other bits of property. It's location, location, location. Because in the cold store industry, the cold store storage is actually relatively cheap compared to transport. So every mile that you're taking off it, it makes it more economical. So you've seen those clusters. I don't necessarily I think those clusters still remain, but what you've seen over the last 20 years is clustering around kind of ports or port areas. Specifically, I think you're going to see it more in regard to Thames Gateway, particularly because of the proximity to London. At the moment, as I think 80% of the reefer traffic already comes through DP World, so at Thames Gateway. So the cold store industry is already supplied through. This is the port of entry. So putting in a cold store at the port of entry, and also the port of exit, because if you're doing export, again, the ability to overload containers out to wherever country is actually hugely valuable.
Obviously, we've had COVID and we've got Brexit, two sort of very short-term but quite fundamentally big economic events that are happening. How do you sort of see those playing out into the sort of decision making, in terms of your own decision making, but generally how you see the cold chain sort of progresses? Does it factor at all in the long-term plan, or is it something that actually means we have to sort of look at the course we were taking, particularly before COVID hit?
I think the course is pretty much the same as what we'd already thought. I mean, what COVID has done is accelerated the requirements of bigger companies taking control of their whole supply chain. So I think you're seeing people with longer thinking about the longer supply chain and storing more. As a consequence to that, they're having to think what is the long term of their storage, and they can't be let down at the last minute because as to 100% full, then you have limited options. And as I say, the cost of distribution means that you can't just have some space in Scotland and some space in London and think you're going to bring it all together, because it's going to cost you more money than having space in London that costs 3 times more money. COVID has escalated it and made it quicker. Brexit is a bit of an unknown, as we all know, because I think the biggest thing in the cold chain position is the difference is what happens with chilled, because if the chilled supply is affected from the near continent, because effectively different customs change that over the next 12 months in any guise, and it reduces the shelf life of chilled product, then probably a lot of the product won't come in chilled, it'll come in frozen, and then it will require a completely different process. At the moment, that's not the case. You know, there's a lot of product that comes through Dover. Yeah. A lot of product that comes in through Liverpool from Ireland, and that whole process could be completely changed overnight, or it may be changed. It may be changed over a number of years as the government try to come up with solutions that don't mean that there is have to be a complete change overnight, because you know, changing whether it comes in fresh or it comes in frozen, then it's organized is completely different.
Yeah, and I mean, I know, as you know, I spent 2 years in the role, and from day one, all I get asked about is stockpiling, and stockpiling as a solution to the problems on the shelf and how to deal with Brexit and what have you. But what became clear to me pretty much in the first couple of weeks was stockpiling is an important tactic, and it's, like you say, longer supply chains, and it's part of the mix. But fundamentally, it's about rethinking how you get your supplies in, and think about where it comes into the country from, and the short straits. There are going to be significant. Some of the advantages of the short straits are not going to be there post-Brexit. That's almost pretty clear now. So actually, those alternative routes, people are looking at differently. Unaccompanied carriage, whether it's load on, load off, or whether it's unaccompanied trailers, these sorts of things become probably more of the route into the market than they have been historically. And I guess overlaying that with a view about the sustainability of the route you're choosing for your product, because the consumer's more interested, arguably, all plays into that kind of ecosystem. Just sort of final thoughts, really, Stephen, from you. I mean, you've got some big projects underway. What's your sort of prognosis for the sort of future, the short-term future of the cold chain? What sort of the key things you think we're going to see from this industry in the next 2 to 3 years?
Well, I think, as I say, I think you're going to find a hell of a lot more investment into the right buildings. I mean, our plan is to completely revolutionize it, even our existing buildings. So we've got new plant going into it. We've got new fire safety going into them. We've got new developments being added to the sites to make them more efficient. We've got whole new processes. So, you know, I've got a digital team working alongside their actual operational management team to kind of digitally twinning everything from, you know, moving a box from A to moving the box to B, and all the different forklifts to try and look at the efficiencies, to try and take out costs but also taking out, you know, wasted areas of carbon or wasted areas of plastics and everything else that goes with it. So that's really key. But the whole use of computing, AI, automation is all part of the same tools, really.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the themes of this Cold Chain Live event has been this idea that it's as much about the digital tools, the data gathering, and those are some of the keys to achieving net zero in our market, in supply chain generally, and particularly in cold chain, and something that it's really encouraging to see that's coming through in what you're talking about.
I guess we're also looking at things like, you know, electricity procurement, whether it's waste of energy or use through wind farms, or, you know, one of the positions now is to, which is only just coming into play, is to be able to overcool. If you've got the right equipment in the unit, that's the fundamental, which is why we're having to change all our compressors, so we can overcool units and buy electricity at cheap prices when it's being generated by wind, or solar, or whatever it's going to be, so that we can act like a battery to the grid as a whole.
Those sorts of innovations have really come through the course of this event, through the whole course of Cold Chain Live. We've been hearing about some of these sort of technological ways that can really make a difference to and I think that point you've made, that point about cost being the key to unlocking the confidence of the customer and the confidence of the investor to make whatever the right choices are, in inverted commas, when it comes to moving towards net zero.
Yeah.
Stephen, thank you so much for your time, and I really appreciate you for talking us through. And it's really fascinating to sort of get your take on where we're heading with this. In terms of where we are from here, so Cold Chain Live, if you're watching this in the week of the release, then please join us for our workshop on these issues on 11 a.m. on Friday, 23rd of October. We'll be hearing some other great experts on how the cold chain ecosystem can adapt to the challenge of net zero. And if not, and you're interested in some of the other great content we've shared throughout this Cold Chain Live series, please go to the Cold Chain Federation website and you'll follow the links for other great content. But for now, thanks very much, and we look forward to talking more.